Hey there BookTube, welcome back to my channel and welcome to my Books Around the World 2018. This is a video where I talk about the books that I've read that are set in different countries around the world, and I try to use the initials of all these countries to complete the alphabet. Last year I almost completed the challenge, so I'm going to link those videos for my 2017 Books Around the World videos in the description box down below. So if you haven't already watched them, you might want to see how I did in 2017, and stay tuned for my Books Around the World 2018 video. Throughout the year, I try to keep my reading varied, and the challenge that I set for myself is to read a book from every country where the initial completes the alphabet. But that's the ideal. There is a complexity towards completing that ideal in that there are no officially recognized independent countries that begin with X or W, and there's only one country each for the letters O and Q. And spoiler alert, in 2018, I did not read a book that was set in Oman or Qatar. So this is my official statement. I did not complete the alphabet in 2018. So because I didn't complete the alphabet, and there are a few other letters that I did not read books that were set in countries that had that letter as their initial, I decided instead to make a little twist on my challenges here, and I'll tell you all the books that I read in 2018 that were set in international settings and tell you which countries I read from. So in today's video, here are all the countries that I visited in books in 2018. Stay tuned. A is for Australia, and in 2018 I read two books that were set in Australia: The Dry by Jane Harper, as well as The Narrow Road to the Deep North by Richard Flanagan. This one had two settings, Australia proper as well as Tasmania, which is an Australian territory. B is for Barbados, and in 2018 I read Washington Black by Ezio Dugan. This was a Man Booker Prize nominee, and it stars in Barbados even though the main character travels to other countries as he... that may be a spoiler, so let me not tell you too much more. But C is for Canada, and Washington Black also has a Canadian setting. I also read The Peculiar Life of the Lonely Postman by Dennis Thirald. That was set in Canada. I read The Emperor of Shoes by Spencer Weiss. That has a Chinese setting. D is for Denmark, and Anne Youngson's Meet Me at the Museum is set in Denmark. E is for Egypt, and in 2018 I read V.S. Naipaul's In a Free State, which contains two short stories that are set on a ferry bound for Egypt. So we're going to consider Egypt to be the major setting for these stories, and so we're going to say, yeah, I visited Egypt, or at least sat in a ferry on my way to Egypt in these books. F is for France, and I go to France every year, or at least I read a book that's set in France almost every year. And 2018 was no different. I read several books that had a French setting. The first is The Elegance of the Hedgehog by Muriel Barbary. I also read Little Paris Bookshop by Nina George. I read two books by Amélie Nothomb, Petronille and Life Form. Both of those were set in France. Even though I read other books by this author, they had different settings. I also visited Finland in 2018. I read the summer book by Tove Jansson that was set in Finland. G is for Germany, and in 2018 I read Go Went Gone by Jenny Erpenbeck. G is also for Greece, and in 2018 I read Putney by Sofka Zinoviev. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that name right, but a part of this book is set in Athens, so I'm going to consider that I went to Greece in 2018 as well. I don't think I read a book that was set in a country that started with H in 2018, so I'm going to skip over H and go to I, and I read a lot of books that were set in India. First is The White Tiger by Aravind Adiga. I also read The Lowland by Jhumpa Lahiri, Midnight Children by Salman Rushdie, A Lot of Small Things by Arundhati Roy, The Life of Pi by Jan Martel, Heat and Dust by Ruth Prawar Javala. I also went to Ireland, From Below and Quiet Sea by Donald Ryan, John Banville's The Sea, which was a previous Man Booker Prize winning novel. I visited Israel because David Grossman's novel A Horse Walks Into a Bar is set in Israel. I also visited Italy a couple of times in 2018. I read two books by Elena Ferrante, The Beach at Night and Days of Abandonment. I seem to really enjoy books by Japanese authors, so in 2018 I read several books that were written by Japanese authors and set in Japan. I even have books that were written by non-Japanese authors and set in Japan. First, I had a historical fiction novel by Susan Span. This one was entitled Child at Mount Koya. I also had a novel entitled Convenience Store Woman by Sayako Murata that was set in Japan. And one of Amelie Notham's books, Fear and Trembling, was also set in Japan because the author does have some Japanese roots and she has spent some amount of her adult life in that country. I also read Yukio Mishima's The Frolic of Beasts. That was set in Japan. I read that one in November. J is for Jamaica, and in 2018 I read Mullen James' A Brief History of 7 Killings, as well as How to Love a Jamaican, which was a short story collection from Alexia Arthurs. K is for Korea. I read Kyung Suk Shin's I'll Be Right There. I did not read a book that was set in a country that starts with L or a country that starts with M. N is for the Netherlands, and I read The Dinner by Herman Koch. Sections of Flights by Olga Tokarczuk are set in Netherlands. Donna Tartt's novel The Goldfinch has a Netherlands setting, as well as Amsterdam by Ian McEwan, which is a Booker Prize winning novel. N is also for New Zealand, and I read The Luminaries by Eleanor Catton. I also read books that were set in Nigeria, so N is for Nigeria. I read Stay With Me by Ayobami Adebayo. I read Freshwater by Akweka Emezi. I still wasn't done with N because I read Ruth Ware's Women in Cabin 10, which, while a lot of it is set aboard a cruise ship, there is a section of the book that's also set in Norway. Oh dear, sorry I didn't read any books that were set in Oman in 2018, but I did read books that were set in countries that start with P. P is for Philippines, and I read a short story collection by Nick Joaquin entitled A Woman Who Had Two Navels. And The Complete Mouse by Art Spiegelman is about a Holocaust survivor who was living in Warsaw, Poland. Again, I didn't read any books that were set in Qatar in 2018, so I'm gonna have to find a Qatari author or a book that's set in that country to read in 2019. But R is for Romania, and in 2018 I read The Fox Was Ever the Hunter by Herta Müller. She's a Nobel Prize winning author, and this was the first time that I was reading something from her. I also read The Girl They Left Behind by Roxane Villedas, also set in Romania. S is for South Africa, and I read several books that were set in South Africa in 2018. I read Nadine Gordimer's The Conservationist. I read 2 books by J.M. Coetzee, Life and Times of Michael Kay and Disgrace. Both of those were Booker Prize winning novels. I also read The Mandela Plot by Kenneth Bonnert, also set in South Africa, about South African Jews. Then we get to Sweden, and I read Pippi Longstocking by Astrid Lindgren, which is translated children's book that I didn't realize was set in Sweden until I finally read it. S is also for Switzerland, and I read Anita Bruckner's Hotel du Lac, which is a Man Booker Prize winning novel set in Switzerland as well. I didn't read any books that were set in countries that start with T. But for you, I read books that were set in Ukraine. I read Voices from Chernobyl by Svetlana Alexievich. U is also for the United Kingdom, and I read several books that were set in the United Kingdom in 2018. I started with Eleanor Oliphant is Completely Fine. That is set in Scotland. In England, we had The Remains of the Day by Kazuo Ishiguro. I read Matt Haig's novel The Humans. I read Winter by Ali Smith. I read The Outcasts of Time by Ian Mortimer, which explored various eras in English history. I read The Stellar by Natasha Preston, The Buried Giant, again by Kazuo Ishiguro, and Snap by Belinda Bauer. All of these were set in England. I did not have any books that were set in countries that start with V or W or X or Y or Z. And so that's it. That's the end of my Books Around the World 2018 version. Leave me a comment down below. Let me know if you read any of these books, and if this is a challenge that you would like to give yourself in 2019 to read more books around the world and see if you can complete the alphabet, or as close to completing the alphabet as the independently named countries around the world permit. If you could complete the 24 letters of the alphabet that we have countries representing, let me know if you'd like to do that challenge in 2019. I'm going to try to do it again this time. I think maybe around the middle of the year. I'm going to make a concerted effort to fill in the blanks. If there are countries that I haven't yet read from, letters that I haven't yet completed, then I'm going to try to find books that complete that letter, so that at the end of the year, at the end of 2019, when I do my Books Around the World, I'll have way more books to talk about, but also that I'll have completed the alphabet as much as I can. So leave me a comment down below. Let me know if you enjoyed this video. Give me a thumbs up if you liked it. Subscribe if you haven't already, and let's talk down there. So until next time, happy reading. Bye.